Welcome to another solo episode of Cinema Shame. Hopefully our regular listeners took the time to listen to my solo episode from last season, where I used the examples of a forgotten dancer, a former teen idol, his brother, and a wannabe starlet turned porn star to illustrate my thesis that the IMDb is the saddest website on the internet. Like that episode, this second audio essay was created in an attempt to adapt works I originally wrote for my blog, vanityfair.com, into a potential podcast, and it's about what happened the first time I watched a really terrible movie. I actually think it's pretty decent, if a bit lightweight in comparison to my previous attempt, but it seemed appropriate to dig it out and release it this week since it's about a Hulk Hogan movie, and well, he's dead now. And just so we're clear, this is not a tribute episode. So if you've been saddened by the lack of respect people have shown Terry Bollea since the news of his passing, you'll probably want to skip this. I don't really talk about what a truly awful person he was, but I do make it clear I never understood his popularity at any point in my life. But if you think the disrespectful response that followed the news of his passing was appropriate, then please give this a listen. It's only a half hour, and just like last time I did something like this, I managed to talk about porn again. Speaking as someone who loves to analyze popular culture, I must admit there are moments where I find some of the more traditional forms of criticism confounding. I'm mostly talking about the idea of criticism as a form of consumer protection. Don't spend money on this movie because it is bad. Spend money on this one because it is good. The problem, of course, is that good and bad are completely subjective concepts, especially when it comes to art. Very often when I listen to a person list the reasons why they hated a work, they are simultaneously listing the reasons why I loved it. And the only way either of us is wrong is if we insist that only one of us is right. So I tend not to judge movies on that scale. Instead, I focus on the vast divide between the interesting and the boring, which is just as subjective but is in its own way less finite and judgmental. Because in this context, boring doesn't necessarily mean bad or unworthy. It just means there's really nothing in it that's worth exploring or talking about. And that's ultimately what I'm looking for when I watch a movie. Does it make me think? Which I know is what every pretentious critic says. But where I differ is that the films that rev up my imagination are not the ones that usually make 10 best lists. I'm less interested in the work of cinema's poets than I am in its rank and file, the men and handful of women who bust their asses to create the works they know aren't being created to last, but to just make a buck. As a writer, I understand the soul of a sellout more than I do that of a genius. I am fascinated by the compromises and humiliations of creating apparently worthless media. The reality is that most people, even those who claim to love film, have little to no respect for the masters who routinely achieve greatness. So there's a special sadness in the existence of those who are just lucky to work at all. Now, I'm telling you all this because this whole episode is about a Hulk Hogan movie. One that if you were to judge it on the good-bad scale would no doubt be rated awful, but which to me, on the interesting boring scale, is definitely worth 30 minutes of your time.
Stand back, way back, get ready for the battle no ropes can hold. No ring, no referee, no rules.
Gentlemen, it's time.
No holds barred.
This is an unprecedented display of strength and determination.
Like many children of the 80s, I fully embrace the theatrical world of professional wrestling. With their inhuman bodies and high-flying acrobatics, professional wrestlers were the closest we ever got in that period to watching real live superheroes in action. The best matches had a beauty, drama, and grace to them that was as compelling as any movie you could name. I can still feel the pure joy I experienced when Ricky the Dragon Steamboat finally pinned Randy Macho Man Savage during WrestleMania 3 after the most tense and excruciating 15 to 20 minutes of my life. Even though I first saw it on videotape months after it actually happened, I clapped and cheered so loudly, I'm sure Steamboat must have heard me wherever he was in the world at the time. But despite the enjoyment I derive from wrestling, I can honestly say that I never really understood the phenomenon of Hulkamania. Even at a very young age, I appreciated the fact that the wrestling part of professional wrestling was bullshit. And because of that, I enjoyed watching the wrestlers who told the best stories in the ring and made it seem almost kinda legitimate. For all of his enormous popularity, Hulk Hogan was clearly not one of these wrestlers. While many of my peers marveled at the size of his pythons, I couldn't help but notice how slow he was, how few moves he seemed to have, and how predictably tedious it was whenever he came back from the brink of defeat by feeding on the cheers of the crowd. It didn't hurt that, as the smallest boy in each and every one of my classes, I was naturally inclined to be suspicious of those whose only claim to fame was that they were bigger and stronger than everyone else was. Hulk Hogan clearly benefited from the phenomenon that causes most young kids to assume a nickel is worth more than a dime, because it seems ridiculous that the smaller coin would ever be the more valuable of the two. I, however, knew bigger did not mean better, and therefore had little time for those wrestlers who brought nothing else but bulk to the table. Although that didn't stop me from loudly cheering for Andre the Giant that same night I cheered for Steamboat. I'd like to say that by 13 I had grown too old for all of this, but that would be a lie. I was still a faithful fan when the Hulkster's Leading Man debut was released to theaters. Hell, I even occasionally bought the magazine, but my disdain for him kept me from seeing it. If they had released a movie starring Randy Savage, Jake Roberts, or, most especially, Miss Elizabeth, I would have probably been there opening day. But I had no time for No Holds Barred, especially since even at that age, I could tell that there was no way it could be anything but terrible.
What's that smell?
29 years later, and my relationship with pro wrestling is now exactly like the one I have with hardcore pornography. I find the actual product impossible to watch, but the industry itself fascinates me. I can't get through more than 5 minutes of any episode of Raw, but I still enjoy reading the behind-the-scenes stories about the men and women who made wrestling famous, and those who continue on the tradition today. For this reason, I decided it was time to check out Hogan's famous Folly, a film supposedly so terrible that it somehow tarnishes the filmography of the man who starred in Mr. Nanny, Santa with Muscles, and Three Ninjas 3. Before I even pressed play on my Apple TV remote, I knew I was in for some serious pain, but I never would have dreamed what I would feel when it was over and the end credits began to roll. Admiration.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Now, before you assume I'm writing this while trying to fatally overdose on crazy pills, please understand that I never, for once, thought that No Holds Barred was a good movie. But instead, that I quickly realized that what I was watching wasn't terrible as a result of filmmaking incompetence, but instead the result of a phenomena I myself know only too well. But before we jump hip deep into all of this, here's a brief synopsis. Rip, no last name given, no last name needed, is the heavyweight champion of the World Wrestling Federation and a thorn in the side of Brel, the sociopathic network president of WTN. Unable to convince Rip to jump to his channel through bribery or violence, Brel decides to make a star out of Zeus, a demented ex-con behemoth who quickly becomes a national sensation, fighting in anything-goes, no-holds-barred matches. Rip succumbs to Zeus's taunts for a match when he cripples Rip's beloved younger brother, Randy. The night of the big match, Brel kidnaps Rip's girlfriend, Samantha, and orders him to give Zeus a good 10 minutes before throwing the match. For a time, it seems like Rip won't have to throw anything. But when he sees that Samantha is safe, he finds the inner strength he needs to defeat his opponent and ensure that Brel never hurts anyone else ever again.
I know you out there. And I'm waiting for you.
There were two groups of people on the set of this film. The first group consisted of Hogan, producer Vince McMahon, and, I'm guessing, leading lady Joan Severance. They believed they were making a real movie, one that would entertain and excite a large mainstream audience. The second group consisted of everyone else who worked on the picture, including director Thomas J. Wright, screenwriter Dennis Hacken, and especially co-star Kurt Fuller, who played the part of Rip's evil network president antagonist.
Are you trying to tell me my money's not good enough for you? I find it a little hard to swallow, you jackass!
The folks in the second group did not share the first group's delusions of grandeur. They knew full well they were trapped in the middle of a ridiculous vanity project that had no hope of being anything approaching good. So they all said a collective fuck it and decided that if it was going to fail, it might as well fail on their own spectacular terms. I came to this conclusion when I finally realized why the film felt so familiar. There was something about its tone that felt oddly recognizable. It was only a few minutes after Hogan's character so completely terrified a potential kidnapper that he literally shit his pants that I realized I was watching the greatest film Lloyd Kaufman never made.
Meet little Melvin. He's a 90-pound weakling. Everyone hated Melvin.
I'm gonna take this mop and shove it down your throat.
They teased him.
I want to do it with you.
Okay.
They taunted him. They tormented him until he had a horrifying accident and fell into a vat of nuclear waste, transforming little Melvin into a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. Melvin became the Toxic Avenger.
As the co-owner of Troma Studios, Kaufman is responsible for such films as The Toxic Avenger, Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, Tromeo and Juliet, Terra Firma, and Poltergeist. His films are infamous for reveling in bad taste, but in such a way that feels deliberate and almost artful. There's a rebellious quality to his nudity, violence, and scatological jokes, each film serving as a cinematic middle finger to what he sees as mainstream Hollywood's embrace of mediocrity in favor of originality. You want terrible, he asks? I'll fucking give you terrible. As bizarre as it may sound, I finished watching No Holds Barred convinced that it was made with this same attitude in mind. And I completely understood why.
You jackass!
It's a truism few artists, whatever their medium, take on a project expecting it to fail. But it doesn't take long for the signposts of failure to become impossible to ignore. And once you've seen enough of them, you have two choices: succumb or rebel. Succumbing means biting a bullet and creating something you know is shitty and nothing else. Rebelling means becoming subversive and creating something that's still shitty, but on your own terms, and not in the way the people paying your paychecks expected. Whether it's an artist who paints a penis into a Disney movie poster, or an author who writes a ghost story called A Boy and His Instrument in a book called Haunted Schools that's all about masturbation if you read it correctly. Hey, that was me. These acts of rebellion often go unnoticed by even the most perceptive of audience members who simply assume that the artists lack talent and nothing more. But we brave few who have been in these situations ourselves know deliberate, subversive shittiness when we see it, and have no choice but to salute and admire it when we do.
These people are crazy!
It definitely helps my case that the film bears little relation to those found in Group 2's various filmographies. Although Wright only got the chance to direct one other feature, he still managed to amass an admirable amount of credits directing some of the best and most popular episodic shows found on television, including The X-Files, Angel, Firefly, CSI, and NCIS. Hacken began his career with the critically acclaimed Clint Eastwood comedy Bronco Billy, and Fuller remains one of the funniest character actors working today. His crowning achievement being his role in the original live-action The Tick, where he played Destroyo, a genocidal supervillain whose hatred of mankind derived from the cruel taunts of "Dance, fat boy, dance" he received when he was an overweight ballet prodigy.
Do you really think I'm needy?
Needy? No. What you are is wanty. There's a difference.
Which is worse?
Wonty. Definitely wonty.
This is not your standard collection of deluded, untalented assholes. These are skilled professionals who found themselves caught in an absurd situation and decided to not go gently into that good night in order to deal with it. The question then is, how did Group 2 manage to make a movie that was deliberately and subversively hilarious without Group 1 noticing? To answer this, I'm going back to the connection between wrestling and hardcore pornography I made a few minutes back by looking at a film doomed in its conception due to the inability of its director to appreciate how much his perspective had been shifted by his previous work.
Ice cream man, upon my street. I love your truck outside. Really neat.
Starring Clint Howard as the serial-killing title character, 1995's Ice Cream Man sets itself apart by being a violent, R-rated, nudity-filled slasher movie whose reliance on prepubescent protagonists makes it feel like the most socially irresponsible kids movie of all time. Too violent and profane for its target audience and too juvenile for adults, it was a film that could only have been made by someone whose sense of what was and was not appropriate had been lost a long time ago.
There's something weird going on here.
Norman Apstein was just such a someone. Before making Ice Cream Man, he had, as Paul Norman, directed over 120 hardcore adult movies, including Edward Penis Hands, in which Tim Burton's famed romantic hero was reimagined as a dude with penises where his hands should be, and Cyrano, in which Edmond Rostan's famed romantic hero was reimagined as a dude with a penis where his nose should be. Can you sense a theme here? Having spent so much of his life focusing his frame on the most intimate of human acts and putting penises where other body parts should be, Apstein had lost all sense of what did and did not work in the context of a mainstream film.
There goes the neighborhood.
In the case of No Holds Barred, I believe the members of Group 1, save Severance, who was probably just happy to have a part in a movie, were too immersed in the world of professional wrestling to see how inappropriately it translated into the medium of long-form narrative filmmaking. Anyone who has spent more than 10 minutes watching anything the WWF produced in the 80s can appreciate how Hogan and McMahon would have developed this blind spot. They worked on a spectacle designed to appeal to the folks in the cheap seats, who did not demand, and thus were not given, anything approaching subtlety. Pro wrestling during the Reagan era was a time of black and white and good and evil. The babyfaces were brave, virtuous men who said their prayers, ate their vitamins, and loved America, while the heels were capricious cowards who lied and cheated and, worst of all, saluted the communist flag. You can only produce this kind of entertainment for so long before you either buy into it wholeheartedly or become so innately cynical that you lose all sense of perspective of what is and is not appropriate. I can't say for sure which applied to Hogan or McMahon, but if I had to guess, it was probably a combination of both. The reason why people my age loved the WWF in the 80s was because it was squarely aimed at 10-year-old audiences at the exact moment when we were 10 years old. This was a departure from previous decades, where wrestling was considered a largely adult entertainment, boxing with a bit more flair and drama. Yet this change in direction did not drive adults away. If anything, wrestling reached its highest peak of mass popularity during this period. Hogan forever supplanting Gorgeous George in the public's consciousness. You could be generous and say that the WWF's 80s product reflected the innocence and simplicity of the era, or you could say that it was adored by morons who wouldn't know quality entertainment if it set its testicles directly upon their faces. To be fair, the exact same thing could be said about the majority of low-budget action movies produced during that time. See, for example, Invasion USA. I think in order to successfully produce this kind of product, you really have to believe in it and disdain it at the same time. While it is popular for artists to suggest that they are no different than the audiences they work so hard to entertain, I think most know in their hearts that this is bullshit. The difference between creating and consuming product is that the creator has no choice but to be aware of everything that goes into the process required to make the art happen. At the time No Holds Barred was produced, the wrestling industry still practiced the tradition of kayfabe, keeping up the pretense of wrestling's reality into everyday life, so as not to betray its essential artifice. That's why the industry's slang word for fans was the exact same one con men used for their victims, mark, a term synonymous with sucker. Kayfabe, more than anything else, is the most fascinating part of wrestling's history. Imagine if Laurence Olivier had to pretend he was a Danish prince every time he went to a town and played Hamlet. Or if Joan Collins and Linda Evans had to catfight in a water fountain whenever they were spotted somewhere off the set of Dynasty. The only real Hollywood equivalent would be all of the LGBTQ+ performers who were forced to stay in the closet over the years. McMahon and Hogan clearly made a film they thought the marks would love, demanding that it be filled with the same black and white moral dramatics that made them so rich to begin with. Hogan's Rip character had to be virtuous to the point of audacity, proclaiming that he was far more interested in charity than self-promotion, and heroically spending all of his time rehabilitating his injured brother instead of training for the most dangerous match of his life. At the same time, his opponents are just as venal and mindlessly evil as any ever seen on screen. Made just a year after Ted Turner bought Atlanta's NWA promotion with the intention of turning it into the nationally televised WCW, and thus become the first non-regional competition that the WWF faced in years. It doesn't seem like an accident that the main villain is a network president with the moral compass of a dung beetle.
Well, what do we have here? Zeus converting Rib fans. Great. That's what I like to see. We'll convert them all.
Hey, we are not Zeus fans. Yeah, that's right. Rip's his brother.
So, Rip's brother. My, what an honor. Isn't it an honor, guys?
Yes, sir.
Well, that makes you boys practically VIPs. Zeus loves VIPs. Doesn't he, guys?
Yeah.
That said, Brel bears no sign of Turner's distinctive manner or personality. I'd say this was to avoid a potential libel suit, but I remember a few years after No Holds Barred was released, McMahon aired a series of skits featuring a Turner clone behaving like a redneck buffoon, so it's not like he was afraid to go there. Even more hilarious is Zeus, who plays the same role Clubber Lang and Ivan Drago did in Rocky 3 and 4, but without any of their depth, subtlety, or nuance. Tommy, tiny to his friends, Lister's performance is so perversely over the top that it takes on a kind of absurdist genius. With his crossed eyes, tattooed head, and penchant for uncomfortable metallic clothing, he actually seems too over the top even for wrestling, which turned out to be true when the character was unsuccessfully transplanted into the real WWF to promote the movie. It didn't help that Lister had no professional wrestling experience and managed to be even clumsier in the ring than Hogan. Amazingly, out of all the performers in the film, he's probably had the most consistently successful career, having not only worked non-stop since his appearance in No Holds Barred, but also making his mark in high-profile productions like The Fifth Element, Jackie Brown, and The Dark Knight.
Hey, C-Note, how do I figure my net worth?
Yo, how many times I gotta tell you? Write your questions down, I'll hook you up later.
I'm sorry. That was rude of me, man.
That said, the bad guys are at least given the chance to develop actual on-screen presences, which cannot be said for Rip's friends. The brother who inspires him to win all of his matches is just a handsome blonde guy with a goofy 80s haircut, who would go on to become Jacob, Lost's mysterious protector of the Golden Spring. His trainer is just some old black dude, and at least two of the other people who hang out with him are never even introduced on screen. The film's only other character with a personality is Sam.
Rip, we need fresh new leadership representing your talent. Sam is intelligent and aggressive. Rip meets your new account executive, Sam.
Samantha and more. Pleased to meet you.
Sam?
Rip's new business manager, who has to work harder at her job than a man would because she looks just like Joan Severance, and everyone within a 100-mile radius wants to have crazy hot monkey sex with her. There's no doubt that Severance is astonishingly attractive, but in such a way that detracts rather than adds to her credibility. She's one of those actresses who is simply too good looking, since it becomes impossible to imagine her in any other role than that of model or actress. It doesn't help that she's precisely the kind of limited performer required to make sure that Hogan doesn't get wiped off the screen.
And as long as you stay on your side of the bed, everything will be fine.
What kind of animals do you go out with anyway?
I don't.
Don't what?
Go out.
Come on. Don't tell me.
Oh, don't tell me. A beautiful girl like you doesn't have them lined up a mile long.
Well?
Well, I'm really too busy to date.
Must get lonely.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, I know.
Don't patronize me.
As I've already said, there are two films at play here, although sometimes the lines do seem to cross. The film's bizarre penchant for scatological or inappropriately sexual jokes has a direct connection to similar material that has shown up on McMahon's wrestling shows over the years, but at the same time, they are taken to such perversely extreme levels that they extend beyond the realms of McMahon's famously bad taste to that of deliberate transgression. This is most evident in the moments Hogan and McMahon obviously did not intend to be funny. There are many films that are so badly made that they transform into inadvertent self-parody, but in the case of No Holds Barred, I am certain this is only half the case. Hogan and Severance are clearly sincere, but everyone else around them is just as clearly cognizant of how ridiculous the whole enterprise is, and they show it. For someone like me, the result is spellbinding, but for the average wrestling fan for which it was intended, it was clearly bewildering. For most people, deliberately shitty is still just shitty, and a waste of time and money, which explains why the filmmaker's efforts here went almost completely unnoticed. I say almost, because I know the film has at least one acolyte out there. Back when I was 19, I was in my second year of university, the last that would actually count, as my third and final year was pretty much a write-off, and taking a film studies course that examined the auteur theory by looking at the films of Dreyer, Bresson, Fuller, Ophuls, and Kurosawa. Among the students was another young man whose name has been lost to time. He was born with Down syndrome and was there as part of a program that allowed those with disabilities to enjoy the university experience. It was a noble idea to be sure, but in practice it meant we all had to listen to his snoring after one of the boring foreign films or lectures put him to sleep. Near the end of the year, he finally lost his patience during a lecture and threw up his hand. Professor Bill Beard, who would go on to write The Artist's Monster, an excellent analysis of the films of David Cronenberg, asked him what his question was, and it became clear that he had spent all of his time in class waiting for the subject of his favorite film to finally be discussed, and he could no longer wait for this to happen organically. With the floor now his, he proceeded to describe in detail the climactic match between Rip and Zeus. Everyone listened patiently, and it was only when it became painfully clear that he wasn't about to stop that Professor Beard interrupted him and explained that he couldn't answer the question because he hadn't seen the film. In retrospect, I wish he had. I would have vastly preferred to debate the symbolism of Rip's Rip'em t-shirt than hear another word about Diary of a Country Priest. Of course, the greatest irony of the film is that 5 years after the failure of No Holds Barred, Hogan did what Rip would not, and jumped over to Turner's WCW following the promise of a bigger paycheck. As the innocence of the 80s turned into the cynicism of the 90s, Hogan eventually abandoned his babyface image and became Hollywood Hogan, the leader of the renegade NWO. He would eventually return to McMahon's company, but by that point he was purely a nostalgia act. Though he would gain fame as a reality TV star and Gawker website killer, his film debut clearly represented his jump the shark moment. No Holds Barred was supposed to be proof that he was more than a mountain of muscle, but it ended up being proof that he was nothing else. Truthfully, no one came away from the film unscathed. The problem with the subversive, shitty strategy being that it often looks worse on your resume than if you just hadn't made any effort at all. In the eyes of many, being a professional means producing the regular kind of terrible when that's what you're being paid for. But to assholes like me, there's a unique heroism in not just accepting mediocrity. If you know from the beginning that you have no chance of creating something good, why not try and make something interesting?
Hey, dude, you ain't got enough money to buy me out. Yeah, everybody's got a price. Oh, I'd like to bust you up real bad. Yeah, see Virgil. If you only knew what I'm gonna do to you.
This has been Rip Them a New One, written, performed, and recorded by Allan Mott. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends and do anything that makes it feel like the effort has been worthwhile. Have a good day.
Your destiny belongs to me. If you only knew.
You have chosen